Greetings, students, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Zoller's podcast. All right, today we are going to be talking about an idea called Manorialism. And so the way I want to start is by looking at our essential question for today. Now, our essential question is, what is Manorialism, and how is Manorialism connected to feudalism? So, in order to answer this question, first thing I want to do is actually go back and talk a little bit about feudalism. Remember that feudalism is a political system of local government that is based around granting land in return for loyalty, military assistance, and other services. So we're going to start with our king over here and the king's land. And if you recall, we said, okay, the king controls the land, but it's in his best interest to give away some of this land to other people in order to get their loyalty in return. So if we take just a piece of the king's land over here and we move it over. Now, this person is a vassal of the king, and the king over here is a lord of our vassal. Remember, we've talked about that in terms of feudalism, and we said even this cycle is going to compete. So we'll take our vassal over here, and we're going to say that with that vassal, he's actually going to take some of his land, and he's going to subdivide it even further. So he might take a small chunk and give it to somebody over here. He might take another small chunk of his land and give it to somebody over here. This person and this person are now vassals of our intermediate guy over here. He is now, by the way, in addition to being a vassal of the king, he is now also a lord, right? We talked about how if you give away land, then you are a lord. If you receive land, you're a vassal. And so in this case, it's actually possible for this person to be a vassal and a lord at the same time. All right, that's feudalism in a nutshell, right? And we've talked about feudalism before. Well, now we need to bring it back to our idea here. Well, here's a main idea about manorialism. The word manorialism comes from the manors of the Middle Ages. And these manors were large farming estates that were the basis of these feudal communities. Okay, so these are the actual pieces of land. Here's the connection that I want you to make. When our vassal gives away some of his land and he becomes a lord, that piece of land that he's giving away, that's a manor. And those are the things that we're going to be talking about here today in terms of our discussion of manorialism, right? So what I'd like to do then is come up with an actual definition of manorialism. And by the way, grab your notebook page here because I'm going to want you to write this down. Here's our definition of manorialism. Manorialism is a system based around self-sufficient farming estates where the lord and the peasants lived off that land together. All right? So what I want you to take from this, guys, and by the way, you may want to pause this for a second while you write it down. Let's go ahead and do that. Okay, here's what I want to do next. I'd like to zoom in on this map that we're looking at here and give you guys an example sort of what we're talking about. Now, I know that this may be a little bit hard to read, so I want to put some labels on this map so you can see what we're talking about here. If I go back to my definition here, this is the key piece I want you guys to take out, self-sufficient. And when we say self-sufficient, what we're talking about is they are alone. They are operating independently. They don't need assistance from other places. They're not relying on somebody else. They're able to do all of this stuff on our own. So now if we zoom back in on that map, there are a couple things I want to point out to you here that are labeled on here. And by the way, check out that map that's on your notebook page too, because you can see some of these very same things. If we look at this map here, we can see, first of all, we're talking about people, right? So there are different places to live. We've got a village. We've got a manor house. If we're talking about people, they've got to have a place of worship. One of the things that we'll say about the Middle Ages as we go forward is how incredibly important religion becomes. But they've also got to have sources of food. So look at all these different pieces of the puzzle that all fit together on that manor. Now, one thing that may occur to you over the course of this discussion is you may say, okay, what about trade, though? I mean, we talk all the time about economies. We've talked about all these huge trade networks. Wouldn't they want to be able to take advantage of those trade networks? The answer is absolutely. There certainly are going to be exceptions here, and I'll put a couple of them up here on the board just so that you can see them. These would be things that would probably be harder for them to produce on their own. But the idea is there are going to be as few exceptions as possible. To the greatest extent that they can, these manners want to produce everything that they need. The more they produce on their own, the more independent they are, the stronger they are. The more they have to rely on other people, the weaker they actually are going to become. So here's what I want you to do next. I want you to flip this page over onto the back, and I'd like you to make a list of things that a manor would need to be self-sufficient. And you can go back to that map that's on the front to get some ideas. You can think about, well, where are these people going to live? What are they going to eat? What sort of tools are they going to need? What do they need to defend themselves? Things like that. So take a minute. I want you to just pause and make a list of as many of these as possible. And we're back. Okay. You've made your list. You've looked a little bit at what these manners are like. And we're going to be talking about that list in class here. But what I'd like to do in conclusion is to go back to that essential question. And remember, I want you to answer this essential question on your packet in as many details as possible so that you'll have this as a study reference later on. Here's our essential question again. What is manorialism, and how is manorialism connected to feudalism? Well, if you remember, we've now defined manorialism. We said it's a system based around self-sufficient farming estates where the lord and peasants lived off the land together. The second part of this question then, that's where we say, well, how is manorialism connected to feudalism down here? Well, that's the piece, remember, that we talked about when we said when the Lord gives away land, when he becomes a lord, that piece of land that we're talking about, those are the feudal manors. That's how this whole system is all tied together. Feudalism, manorialism go hand in hand, and so that's a real important connection to make. Make sure that you answer that essential question tonight, guys. Use as many supporting details as you can, because like I said, down the road, that's going to be a great assistance to you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in class.